2,000 years ago, the Romans built the richest empire on earth and then bankrupted themselves with the same financial mistakes we're making today. They understood that money is never neutral. It's a weapon, a promise, and a lie, all at once. See, the Romans lived by certain rules, unspoken laws about how wealth, debt, and value actually worked. They didn't teach these rules in schools. They learned them through war, crisis, and collapse. These were the money rules of empire, the lessons that built Rome and the mistakes that destroyed it. And every single one of them still applies today. At its height, around the 2nd century after Christ, the Roman Empire stretched from the Atlantic to the Euphrates. It ruled over a quarter of humanity, more than 60 million people united under one currency and one language. Its economy was immense and alive. Trade ships carried grain from Egypt, glass from Syria, and silk from China. Its ports and forums hummed with commerce. Its treasury swelled with tribute from conquered lands, and its citizens believed their money stamped with the emperor's face was eternal. The Roman denarius was as trusted as the modern dollar, until it wasn't. In the beginning, Roman money was solid, literally silver and gold with real weight and intrinsic value. When a Roman paid for bread, he paid in metal mined, refined, and struck by the state. It wasn't abstract. It was labor condensed into coin, the empire's lifeblood made tangible. But as Rome expanded, that same money became the empire's greatest weapon, and eventually, its curse. The wealth of the empire didn't come from productivity or innovation. It came from conquest. New territories brought new slaves, new mines, new taxes. War paid for itself as long as Rome kept winning. But what happens when you build an economy on expansion, and expansion stops? The Romans found out the same way we will through financial illusion. As conquests slowed, the state needed new ways to sustain its promises. It borrowed, taxed, and manipulated its currency, using finance to paper over decline. And while emperors and generals grew rich, ordinary citizens were slowly crushed under the weight of debt, inflation, and corruption. Sound familiar? The Roman Empire's fall wasn't a single event. It was a long, slow unraveling of financial trust. Yet the Romans weren't blind to it. Their greatest minds, their philosophers, statesmen, Cato the Elder preached thrift and discipline, warning that a republic obsessed with luxury would rot from within. Cicero wrote that greed corrupts a nation faster than invasion. The philosopher king himself reminded his people that fortune is never freedom, only temptation. These weren't lofty moral lectures, they were economic diagnoses. Rome's moral decay was its fiscal policy. The paradox was simple. The more Rome grew, the more it needed to feed its appetite for wealth. The state became a machine of consumption, taxing the provinces to pay the legions, looting conquered lands to pay the debt, and minting coins to fund its promises. And every coin it struck carried a message more powerful than any speech or law. The Romans lived and died by their money rules. 5 of them defined the empire's rise and foretold its fall, and every one of them echoes through the world we live in today. Rule 1. All money is political. The Romans knew something modern economists pretend to forget. Money is never neutral. It's not just a tool for trade. It's a declaration of power. Every coin they minted was a message, and every message said the same thing. This empire exists because I, the emperor, say so. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, understood the psychological power of currency better than any ruler in history. When he emerged victorious from years of civil war, he didn't just rebuild the state, he rebuilt trust. His solution wasn't a speech. It was a coin. He flooded the empire with silver denarii bearing his face and the word pax, peace. Every marketplace, every pocket, every transaction reminded Romans who had restored order. His coins suddenly showed temples being rebuilt, cornucopias overflowing, symbols of abundance, not ruin. The money was propaganda. It told people the empire was thriving, even when the streets were still in ashes. Under Trajan, coins became military press. Releases, celebrating victories in Dacia and Parthia. The images of conquered kings and piles of gold weren't just decoration. They were proof that conquest still worked, that expansion was still paying off. Every denarius was a miniature empire, a pocket-sized promise of prosperity. But beneath the shine, Rome was already addicted to its own illusion. Coins no longer represented wealth, they manufactured it. And the emperor's face wasn't just a guarantee of value, it was a reminder of obedience. The message was clear: Your wealth exists because your ruler exists. That's why every regime fought for control of the mint. Whoever made the money controlled the story. 2,000 years later, it's the same game. The faces and metals have changed, but the theater hasn't. In God we trust replaced divine Augustus. Central banks, not emperors, now control the mint. But when modern strongmen start putting their own faces back on coins, as they do again in our time, it's not nostalgia. It's ownership. It's a declaration that the economy isn't a system, it's theirs. The Romans lived by that truth. Money isn't just power. It's propaganda you can spend. Rule 2. Debt is power. Rome was built on credit. Every layer of its society, from farmers to emperors, ran on borrowed money. In the early republic, citizens took loans to buy land, slaves, and seed. Merchants borrowed to fund voyages across the Mediterranean. Even generals borrowed to raise armies, betting their futures on victory. Debt wasn't a problem, it was the engine, but it came with chains. When a borrower defaulted, the creditor could seize his property or his freedom. Indebted citizens could be sold into slavery. Families were broken. Rebellions were born. The Roman elite learned early that lending wasn't just profitable, it was political. Credit was a tool to control the population without sending soldiers. Keep citizens owing, and they'll keep obeying. The Latin word obligatio meant both debt and bond. The Romans didn't even pretend there was a difference. By the time of Julius Caesar, the entire republic was suffocating under debt. Interest rates soared to 12%. Senators mortgaged estates to fund campaigns. Ordinary Romans sold their children into servitude. Caesar, ever the strategist, saw opportunity when he seized power in 49 before Christ. One of his first acts was partial debt cancellation, not out of mercy, out of calculation. He needed popular support to rebuild the republic in his image. Wiping the slate clean wasn't financial policy, it was crowd control. The emperors who followed used debt like emperors today use stimulus, to buy loyalty, to delay collapse, to keep the machine running one more year. The irony is eternal. The empire with all the gold in the world was always broke. Rome didn't have a debt problem, it had a dependency problem. Today we call it credit expansion instead of usury, consumer finance instead of servitude. We encourage citizens to mortgage their lives to chase the illusion of ownership. Just like the Romans, we've mistaken debt for opportunity. The difference is that Rome's creditors wore togas, ours wear suits. Rule 3. Luxury is a virus. The Romans began with simplicity and ended with spectacle. In land and virtue, the founding fathers of Rome, men like Cincinnatus, worked their own fields and wore plain wool tunics. Luxury was seen as weakness. The Senate even passed sumptuary laws to limit how much gold a woman could wear or how many guests a man could invite to dinner. But once the conquests started paying off, simplicity went out the window. Carthage and looting the East, Rome's elites became billionaires in togas. They filled their villas with Greek statues, Egyptian jewelry, and slaves imported from every corner of the world. Gold leaf ceilings replaced wooden roofs. Dinner parties lasted all night. The philosopher Cato the Elder, one of Rome's few remaining frugal men, walked through the He was right. By the 1st century, the culture of thrift that had built Rome was dead. Senators competed to outspend each other on banquets, chariots, perfumes, peacocks, yes, literal peacocks, roasted whole, feathers reattached for presentation. The empire had turned its victories into vanity, and once the taste for luxury spread to the masses, the rot was irreversible. Imported silks replaced local cloth. Roman coins poured into Asia to pay for exotic goods. By the 2nd century, Rome had a trade deficit that even its armies couldn't fix. The empire was bleeding wealth, not from war, but from indulgence. The lesson wasn't lost on its philosophers. Seneca warned that poverty is not the absence of wealth, but the absence of desire, but no one listened. Because when comfort becomes culture, discipline becomes impossible. Rome's downfall didn't begin with invasion, it began with appetite. The people forgot how to live without excess. When the economy stumbled, no one remembered restraint. And once luxury becomes identity, collapse isn't a possibility, it's a schedule. Sound familiar? The Romans had silk and marble. We have influencers and brand deals. The difference is lighting. Rule 4. Inflation destroys empires. If debt was Rome's addiction, inflation was its overdose. For centuries, the denarius, that small silver coin stamped with the emperor's face, was the most trusted currency in the known world. It built roads, paid soldiers, bought loyalty, and gave every Roman a piece of the empire's power. But once the wars stopped paying for themselves, the math stopped working. Armies demanded wages, bureaucracies demanded salaries, citizens demanded bread. The empire was consuming more than it produced, and taxes could no longer keep up. The emperors needed an easy fix, and they found one. They started cheating the coin. Nero was one of the first. He reduced the silver content of the denarius by about 10%, hoping no one would notice. But so did every emperor after him. Caracalla debased the currency further in the year 2, and by the time of Diocletian, the denarius was barely 1% silver, a coin made of lies. Prices skyrocketed. Merchants refused imperial coins. Soldiers demanded payment in gold or goods. Ordinary Romans watched their savings turn to dust. Inflation didn't just raise prices, it broke the social contract. When your empire tells you a coin is worth something, and then proves it isn't, the real loss isn't money, it's faith. In a desperate attempt to restore order, Diocletian tried to control prices by decree. In the year 301, he issued the edict on maximum prices, a massive list of what every good in the empire should cost: grain, wine, shoes, even labor. Disobey, and you could be executed, but no decree can stop panic. People hoarded, markets vanished, and the black market thrived. The empire had officially replaced trust with force, always the last stage before collapse. We like to think we're more sophisticated today, but we're not. We no longer clip silver from coins. We print digital money from thin air. The method changed, not the outcome. When governments inflate, they're doing the same thing Nero did. Rule 5. When people stop believing in money, they stop believing in power. By the 4th century, the Roman monetary system was dead. The denarius was worthless. Taxes had to be collected in grain. Armies were paid in kind, food, land, or loot. Trade collapsed. Cities shrank. Citizens retreated to rural estates where barter replaced coin. The empire didn't run out of money, it ran out of belief. Because money, any money, is just a story people agree to believe. A shared illusion that says, this coin, this note, this number means something. When that illusion collapses, power collapses with it. Rome's economy wasn't conquered, it evaporated. And with it, so did the faith that the empire could protect its citizens or its values. The barbarians didn't destroy Rome, they just walked into the vacuum that inflation left behind. That's how civilizations fall. Not through invasion, through erosion, not with swords, but with spreadsheets. When people lose faith in the system, they stop defending it. The Romans didn't know it then, but they were living through the same delusion we're living through now. That trust can be printed, that prosperity can be borrowed, that infinite growth can exist on a finite planet. They replaced silver with copper, we replaced value with credit, and both empires discovered the same truth. Once the story of money breaks, everything else follows. Look around. The world's reserve currency isn't the denarius anymore, it's the dollar. But the dynamics are identical. We spend more than we produce, print more than we earn, and consume more than we need. Our luxuries define our status, our debt defines our lives, and our leaders use money the same way Roman emperors did, as propaganda for stability. Every dollar carries a face and a promise. But what is that promise worth when governments can print trillions overnight, when inflation outpaces wages, and when half of society lives on borrowed time and borrowed credit? The empire hasn't fallen, it's just digitized. We call our inflation stimulus, our deficits growth, and our debt leverage. It's the same illusion, dressed in modern language. We still tell ourselves the economy is stable because the markets are up, as if numbers can outweigh reality. The Romans thought the same thing about their coinage. Then came the collapse. The Roman system didn't end in fire, it ended in substitution. When the coins failed, people turned to barter. When the state failed, they turned to their landlords. When belief failed, they turned to religion. That's the part of the story no economist wants to admit, that when money stops working, people start looking for gods. We may be closer to that point than we think. The modern world runs on digital trust, the idea that a string of numbers in a database equals real wealth. But behind those numbers are the same fragile human emotions that once held the Roman denarius together: confidence, habit, and fear of the alternative. If that ever breaks, if people stop believing in the system, there's no army, no policy, no emperor strong enough to hold it together. The Romans saw money as moral. They believed that wealth tested a man's character. Cato said it, Seneca repeated it, and Marcus Aurelius lived it. They understood that when a civilization worships money, it eventually becomes enslaved to it. That's the rule we've forgotten. We've built an economy that confuses credit with creation, consumption with culture, and speculation with progress. We praise the emperors of our age, the billionaires, the technocrats, the market makers, as if they're saviors, not symptoms. And every time we call it innovation, Rome laughs from its grave. Because the truth is, the Romans already ran this experiment. They built the world's greatest empire, then debased its money, drowned in its debt, and called it destiny. And when it all fell apart, they blamed everyone but themselves. History doesn't repeat, it just changes costumes. The Romans wore togas, we wear suits. The denarius became the dollar. It's character. And once a society forgets that, collapse stops being a question of if and becomes a matter of when. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers, I'll show you where to look.